The daycare was winding down for the evening, the last few children waiting to be picked up. Miss Karen, one of the caregivers, wiped down a table, keeping an eye on the door as parents arrived one by one. It had been a long day, but she loved this job, loved seeing the kids smile, loved making sure they felt safe and cared for. Then, at exactly 6:12 p.m., he walked in. A tall man, well-dressed but slightly tense, his eyes scanning the room. "Hey, sweetheart," he called, his voice smooth but a little too eager. Little Lily, a bright-eyed 4-year-old with pigtails, ran toward him. She hesitated for just a second before he scooped her up. Something about it didn't sit right with Miss Karen. She had seen hundreds of parents pick up their kids, and this should have been no different. But the way Lily didn't immediately wrap her arms around his neck, the way his grip on her seemed a little too firm, it made her stomach tighten. She forced a polite smile. "Good evening, Mr. Reynolds," she said, watching for any sign that she was overthinking. "Lily had a great day today." He nodded, barely acknowledging her, already turning toward the door. Lily's wide eyes flicked to Miss Karen, and for a brief moment, the little girl's lip quivered. Miss Karen's chest tightened. Something was wrong. She had always trusted her instincts, and right now, they were screaming at her. Before she could think twice, she grabbed her phone and hurried after them, keeping her distance. As she stepped outside, she saw him buckle Lily into the back seat of a dark sedan. But instead of pulling out of the parking lot, he paused, his head turning slightly, as if sensing he was being watched. Miss Karen ducked behind a car, heart pounding. What was going on? And why did she suddenly have the terrifying feeling that Lily might not be safe? Miss Karen pressed herself against the cool metal of a nearby car, her breath coming a little too fast. She told herself she was overreacting, that she was being paranoid. But deep down, she knew better. Years of working with children had sharpened her instincts, and right now, every part of her was telling her that something wasn't right. Peeking over the hood, she watched as Mr. Reynolds hesitated before finally getting into the driver's seat. The way he sat for a moment, gripping the wheel tightly, only made her more uneasy. Most parents, especially after a long workday, just wanted to get home. But he wasn't pulling out yet. He was just sitting there, his face unreadable in the dimming light. Inside the car, Lily sat perfectly still, not fidgeting, not playing with her hands the way she usually did. Her small face was turned toward the window, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Miss Karen didn't know what she was waiting for, but she wasn't going to let them drive away without being sure. Slowly, she reached for her phone, her fingers shaking slightly as she unlocked the screen. Should she call someone? The police? No, she didn't even know what she would say. A father picked up his daughter, and I got a bad feeling about it. That wasn't enough. It wasn't proof. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Maybe she should call Lily's mom. She had spoken to her many times before. Emma Reynolds was a kind woman, always the last to pick up Lily, but never in a rush, always taking a moment to chat about Lily's day. She clearly adored her daughter. But would it be too much to call her now? Would she sound crazy? Before she could decide, the car's brake lights flickered on. The engine rumbled softly as the vehicle inched forward. Panic shot through Miss Karen's chest. This was her last chance. Acting purely on instinct, she straightened up and quickly walked toward the car, waving her hand. "Wait, Mr. Reynolds." The car jerked to a stop. A second of silence. Then, the window on the driver's side rolled down halfway. His face was calm, but something about his expression felt forced. "Yes?" he asked, his voice clipped. Miss Karen forced a polite smile, hoping she wasn't making a mistake. "Sorry, I just realized Lily forgot her sweater inside. You know how chilly it gets in the evenings." There was a pause, a split second too long before he responded. "Oh, that's okay. She doesn't need it. She always likes to have it with her, though," Miss Karen added, shifting her gaze toward Lily. The little girl hadn't turned her head. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, her hands resting stiffly on her lap. Mr. Reynolds glanced at the road, then back at her. "We really need to get going," he said, his tone final. Miss Karen hesitated, her stomach tightening. "It'll only take a second. I can grab it for her if you'd like." "It's fine." His voice was firmer this time. He forced a smile. "Really, thank you, but we're running late." And with that, the window rolled back up. The car inched forward again, this time with more purpose. Miss Karen stood frozen, her heart pounding as she watched them pull onto the street. She couldn't shake the feeling twisting inside her, couldn't ignore the way Lily had looked, so still, so quiet. She wasn't acting like herself. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe it was just a tired kid at the end of a long day. Maybe. But what if it wasn't? She swallowed hard and, before she could second-guess herself, tapped on her phone screen and scrolled to Emma Reynolds' contact. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Then another thought hit her. What if that wasn't Lily's dad at all? A cold shiver ran down her spine. It didn't make sense. He had greeted Lily by name, and she had gone to him without screaming or running. But kids froze up when they were scared. They didn't always fight. Sometimes fear made them quiet. Miss Karen's mouth went dry. No, she had to be sure. Instead of calling Emma right away, she quickly opened her texts and typed, "Hi Emma, just checking in. Did Mr. Reynolds pick up Lily today?" She hesitated before pressing send, her heart hammering against her ribs. Seconds felt like hours as she watched the screen. The message delivered. The read receipt popped up. Then, 3 dots appeared. Miss Karen held her breath. The response came. What? No. He's out of town on a work trip. He isn't supposed to pick her up. The words blurred in front of Miss Karen's eyes. Her hands started to shake. She looked up, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at the road where the car had disappeared. Lily was gone, and the man who took her wasn't her father. Miss Karen's fingers trembled as she clutched her phone, her pulse hammering in her ears. The world around her seemed to blur, the sounds of distant cars and rustling leaves fading into a dull hum. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't paranoia. Someone had just taken Lily. Her breathing turned shallow. She had seconds, maybe minutes, before the car got too far. Without thinking, she sprinted toward her own vehicle, fumbling to unlock the door. As she slid into the driver's seat, she barely registered her own movements. Her mind raced through every possible explanation, every possible mistake she might have made. But the text from Emma burned in her vision. He's out of town. Whoever had just driven off with Lily was not her father. Her hands shook as she started the engine, her foot slamming the gas pedal before she even thought through a plan. The car jerked forward, tires screeching against the pavement as she whipped onto the road. Her eyes darted frantically between the street ahead and her phone, the unanswered text staring back at her. She needed to call the police. That was the logical step. But what would she tell them? That a man who looked like Lily's father had picked her up? That Lily hadn't screamed or fought? Would they take her seriously? Or would precious minutes be wasted trying to explain what had happened? She dialed 911 with one hand, keeping her other tight on the wheel. 911, what's your emergency? Miss Karen's words tumbled out in a rush. A child has been taken. Her name is Lily Reynolds. She's 4 years old. A man just picked her up from the daycare. I thought he was her father, but he's not. Her mother just confirmed. He's driving a dark-colored sedan, heading east on Pine Street. The dispatcher's voice remained calm, but there was urgency beneath it. Do you have a license plate number? Miss Karen's stomach clenched. She hadn't seen it. No, I didn't get a good look, but I know what he looks like. He's tall, light brown hair, wearing a navy suit. Lily has blonde hair, pigtails, wearing a pink dress. Okay, stay on the line with me. We're dispatching officers now. Miss Karen's grip tightened on the wheel. The car had been ahead of her just moments ago, but the stretch of road was long, lined with traffic lights and turnoffs. Her eyes flicked desperately between the different cars up ahead. Then she saw it, a dark sedan, turning sharply down a side street. Too fast, almost like someone in a hurry to get out of sight. Her stomach flipped. That had to be him. She slammed her turn signal and swerved onto the same street, keeping enough distance to avoid suspicion. The dispatcher was still on the line. I think I see them, she whispered, her throat tight. Do not engage, the dispatcher warned. Officers are en route. Miss Karen swallowed hard. She wasn't a hero. She knew that, but every fiber of her being screamed that she couldn't lose sight of that car. The sedan slowed as it approached a four-way stop. The driver hesitated for just a moment, then suddenly veered onto an even smaller road, one that led toward the outskirts of town. Miss Karen's pulse pounded. Why go that way unless he was trying to avoid being seen? She bit her lip, forcing herself to stay steady. He's heading toward Oakwood Drive. It's mostly empty back there. We have units responding, the dispatcher reassured. Miss Karen forced herself to breathe. But just as she turned onto the narrow road, she felt a new wave of fear crash over her. The sedan was gone. Her heart slammed against her ribs. No, no, no. She scanned the road frantically, but there were barely any cars out here. Just overgrown trees and a few abandoned buildings. How had he disappeared so fast? Panic clawed at her throat. She had been right there. She had followed. And still, she had lost him. Tears stung her eyes, but she couldn't let herself fall apart. Lily was still out there. She slammed her hand against the steering wheel in frustration, then forced herself to think. He wouldn't have just vanished. He had to have turned off somewhere. Her eyes flicked toward a small dirt path just off the main road, barely visible in the dim light. It wasn't a real road, more of a forgotten driveway, half hidden by trees. A place someone might go if they didn't want to be found. Her gut twisted. Slowly, she pulled to the side of the road, gripping the phone to her ear. I think I know where he went, she whispered. The dispatcher's voice remained steady. Stay where you are. Officers are on the way. Miss Karen's hands were clammy as she stared at the overgrown path. She wanted to listen. She wanted to wait. But what if Lily needed her now? The minutes stretched unbearably long. Every second that passed felt like a lifetime. Then, just as she was about to convince herself she had imagined it all, a sound reached her ears. A child's muffled cry. Her blood ran cold. It was faint, so faint she might have missed it if she hadn't been holding her breath. But she knew that sound. It was Lily. Miss Karen's body tensed. She gripped her phone tighter. I hear her, she whispered. She's close. The dispatcher's tone sharpened. Do not go in alone. Officers are almost there. Miss Karen knew she should wait. But as another muffled whimper carried through the trees, she realized she couldn't. Lily was terrified, and she was running out of time. Miss Karen's breath came in short, shallow bursts. Every rational part of her mind screamed at her to stay put, to wait for the police, but that small, trembling cry had cut through all reason. Lily was out there, scared, alone, and with someone who wasn't supposed to have her. Her hands tightened around the phone, her pulse a steady drum in her ears. She took one step forward, then another, until she was just at the edge of the overgrown path. The trees loomed around her, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers in the dim light. The dirt road was uneven, covered in patches of dried leaves and roots that had forced their way through the ground over time. Another muffled sound. A sniffle. Miss Karen's throat tightened. Lily. She pressed the phone against her ear again. She's close, she whispered. I think I can see a clearing ahead. Stay put, the dispatcher ordered. Officers are only minutes away. Minutes? That was too long. Miss Karen sucked in a shaky breath, her shoes crunching softly against the dirt as she stepped forward. The wind rustled through the branches, the shadows shifting across the ground. She strained her ears, listening for any sign of movement. Then she heard something else. Footsteps. Heavy. Purposeful. Just up ahead. Her stomach clenched. Whoever had taken Lily was still here. She ducked behind a tree, her heart slamming against her ribs. Slowly, she peeked around the trunk, her fingers gripping the bark for balance. Through the gaps in the branches, she could just make out the dark sedan. It was parked in a clearing, half hidden by the trees. And next to it stood the man. His back was turned to her, but she recognized the navy suit instantly. He was moving quickly, his hands fumbling with something near the car door. Miss Karen's breath caught in her throat when she saw what, or rather, who, he was holding. Lily. The little girl was struggling now, her small hands pushing weakly against him. He muttered something under his breath, adjusting his grip as he pulled the door open. Panic surged through Miss Karen like wildfire. She had to do something. But what? She had no weapon, no way to fight him off if he noticed her. She needed to be smart. Her gaze darted around the clearing, searching for anything she could use. Her heart nearly stopped when she spotted a large rock near the base of a tree. It wasn't much, but it was something. Slowly, carefully, she crouched down and picked it up, her fingers curling around its rough edges. Her breaths were shallow, her hands slick with sweat. She wasn't strong, but she didn't need to be. She just needed to create a distraction, something to buy enough time for the police to get here. The man grunted as Lily let out a muffled whimper. He was growing impatient. Miss Karen had no more time to think. She drew in a breath, steadied her shaking hands, and threw the rock with all her strength. It hit the hood of the car with a loud, metallic clang. The man whipped around instantly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the trees. Miss Karen barely had time to duck behind the trunk, pressing herself against the rough bark as her heart pounded wildly in her chest. Silence. Then, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps crunching against the leaves. He was coming closer. Miss Karen squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to stay still. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, but she knew that would only make noise, would only lead him straight to her. The footsteps paused. A low voice, just feet away. "Who's there?" Miss Karen's breath caught in her throat. She could hear him shifting, hear the way he exhaled sharply, irritated. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he cursed under his breath. "I don't have time for this." His footsteps retreated, moving back toward the car. Miss Karen dared to peek around the tree again, just in time to see him yank open the back door and shove Lily inside. No! She had to stop him. But before she could move, before she could even think of another plan, something else happened. The distant wail of sirens. The man froze, his head snapping up. The flashing red and blue lights were faint in the distance, but they were coming fast. Miss Karen's chest heaved as she watched the man panic. He slammed the door shut and bolted for the driver's seat, his movements frantic now. The car roared to life, tires kicking up dirt as he backed up too fast, nearly skidding on the uneven ground. He was trying to get away. Miss Karen couldn't let that happen. Ignoring the fear clawing at her throat, she did the only thing she could think of. She ran. She sprinted toward the car just as he jerked it into gear, her only thought Lily as she lunged toward the door. The last thing she saw was the man's wild, furious eyes meeting hers through the windshield. And then, the car lurched forward. Miss Karen barely had time to react before the car lurched forward, the tires spinning wildly against the dirt. The force of the sudden movement sent her stumbling backward, her hands scraping against the rough ground as she hit the earth hard. Pain shot through her palms, but she barely registered it. Her eyes were locked on the car, on Lily's terrified face pressed against the window, her small hands pounding weakly against the glass. "No!" Miss Karen gasped, pushing herself up. Her legs burned as she forced herself into a sprint, chasing after the vehicle as it swerved violently, trying to find a way back onto the main road. The sirens were closer now, their piercing wail cutting through the night, but the man wasn't slowing down. If anything, he was getting more desperate. For a split second, Miss Karen thought he might lose control. The sedan fishtailed for a moment on the uneven dirt path, the back end skidding dangerously close to a tree. But at the last second, he corrected, the tires spitting up dust and gravel as he surged forward again. Miss Karen's pulse pounded as she ran, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. She wasn't thinking anymore. She was only moving, only acting on the sheer need to keep Lily in sight. She had no plan, no way to stop him. But if she lost him now, if he made it back onto the open road, then something happened. Instead of gunning it straight toward the highway, the man yanked the wheel hard and veered off to the right. Miss Karen's steps faltered as she realized where he was headed. The bridge. A narrow, old wooden bridge stretched over the creek at the edge of town, barely wide enough for a single car at a time. It was used mostly by locals taking back roads, not meant for high speeds or sharp turns. Miss Karen had driven over it dozens of times before. She knew how unstable it could be, and he was driving too fast. Her stomach twisted as the sedan rocketed toward the bridge, its headlights flashing wildly against the trees. The structure wasn't built to handle that kind of force. If he wasn't careful, the car hit the entrance too hard, the front tires lifting slightly off the ground before slamming back down. The entire bridge groaned under the impact. But the man didn't slow. He was almost across, almost free. Then the sound, a deep, splintering crack. Miss Karen's breath caught as she saw it. The way the wood beneath the back tires suddenly gave way, the way the entire bridge shuddered violently. The car jerked, its rear end dipping dangerously as one will slipped through the collapsing planks. The man slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The structure was breaking apart beneath him. For a single, agonizing moment, the car hung there, half on and half off the bridge, teetering over the dark water below. Then gravity won. Miss Karen let out a strangled cry as the vehicle tipped backward, the nose lifting slightly as the rear end crashed through the broken planks. The sound of twisting metal and splintering would fill the air as the car plunged into the creek below, vanishing in a violent spray of water. For a moment, everything was eerily silent. The sirens were still wailing, the trees rustling in the wind, but all Miss Karen could hear was the rush of blood in her ears. Then movement. Bubbles surfaced where the car had gone under. Then a violent splash, someone trying to break free. Miss Karen took a shaky step closer, her eyes locked on the dark water. The creek wasn't deep, but the current was strong, and the car had gone down fast. Then, suddenly, a figure burst through the surface. The man! He gasped for air, his arms flailing wildly as he tried to get his bearings. His suit was drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes darted frantically around, then up toward the road, where the flashing lights of approaching police cars were now visible. Miss Karen's stomach clenched. He was trying to find a way out. But where was Lily? Panic surged through her as she scanned the water, searching for any sign of the little girl. Nothing. Just the man, coughing and sputtering as he tried to swim toward the embankment. No, no, no. Then another ripple. A tiny, pale hand broke the surface for just a second before slipping under again. Lily. Miss Karen didn't think. She ran straight for the edge of the embankment, barely registering the icy water as she plunged in. The cold stole her breath, but she fought through it, kicking hard as she searched the murky depths. She saw her, a small, struggling form sinking fast, her dress billowing around her like a fading flower. Miss Karen lunged, reaching out, her fingers barely grazing Lily's wrist before she slipped further down. The current was pulling her away. Miss Karen's chest burned as she pushed herself harder, her arms straining as she reached again, this time grabbing hold. She kicked upward with everything she had, her lungs screaming for air. Then, just as her vision started to darken at the edges, they broke the surface. Lily gasped, choking as she clung desperately to Miss Karen. I got you, Miss Karen rasped, tightening her hold. I got you. The sirens were deafening now, the blue and red lights flashing across the water as police officers and paramedics rushed toward the bridge. Voices shouted, figures moving quickly along the bank. But Miss Karen barely noticed. She held Lily close, her heart still hammering as they floated in the dark, churning water. The man had made it to the opposite bank, where officers were already closing in, their flashlights trained on him. But he didn't run. Instead, he stood there, drenched and panting, his face twisted into something unreadable as he watched Miss Karen and Lily in the water. And then, as the officers shouted for him to get on the ground, something flickered in his expression, something Miss Karen couldn't quite place. A smirk, not of arrogance, not of defeat, but something else, something that sent a chill straight through her bones. Then, just as the officers reached him, he whispered something Miss Karen couldn't hear. And, whatever it was, it made her stomach drop. Miss Karen's breath was ragged as she held Lily tightly against her chest, treading water while the flashing lights from the police cars reflected off the churning surface. The paramedics were shouting instructions from the embankment, one of them already wading in to help. But Miss Karen wasn't thinking about that. Her eyes were locked on the man, the father, standing on the opposite bank, drenched, hands raised, surrendering to the officers. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't running. He had been caught, and yet he wasn't panicked. Instead, he was smiling. Not a broad, arrogant smirk, but something smaller, more controlled. A quiet satisfaction that sent a deep, uneasy chill through Miss Karen's spine. One of the officers grabbed his arm, forcing him down onto his knees. Another pressed a hand to his shoulder, speaking firmly, though Miss Karen couldn't hear the words over the rush of water and her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. Lily whimpered softly against her. "Miss Karen?" Her voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "It's okay, sweet girl," she murmured, pushing wet strands of hair away from Lily's face. "You're safe now." The paramedic reached them, taking Lily gently from her arms. Miss Karen let go reluctantly, feeling the little girl's tiny fingers tighten around her wrist before slipping away. Strong hands pulled Miss Karen toward the shore, helping her onto the muddy embankment. Her whole body trembled from the cold, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still spinning, still trying to process everything. She turned back toward the other side of the creek, toward the man. He was on his knees now, hands behind his head, an officer reading him his rights. But his gaze wasn't on them. It was on her. His lips moved. Just a few words. Miss Karen's stomach tightened. She couldn't hear him over the noise of the rushing water and the commotion around them, but she didn't need to. She could read his lips well enough. "See you soon." A shiver ran down her spine, cold and sharp. The officers shoved him forward, leading him toward a waiting police vehicle. But even as they forced him inside, even as the door slammed shut, he never broke eye contact. Miss Karen's fingers curled tightly into the wet fabric of her dress. She wanted to believe it was an empty threat, that this was over, that he would be locked away where he could never hurt Lily again. But something in the way he had said it, something in the certainty of his expression, made her feel like this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Miss Karen sat in the back of the ambulance, a warm blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, but the chill in her bones had nothing to do with the cold water. It was the look in his eyes, the way he had spoken those words, "See you soon." It played over and over in her mind, like a whisper that wouldn't fade. Lily sat beside her, wrapped in a similar blanket, her small hands clutching a stuffed bunny one of the paramedics had given her. She looked exhausted, her eyelids heavy, her body leaning against Miss Karen's side. But she was safe. That was what mattered. An officer approached, his notepad in hand. "Miss Karen, do you feel up to answering a few more questions?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure how much more she could give. Her mind felt foggy, drained from everything that had happened. The officer sighed, glancing toward the police car where Lily's father now sat, his face partially hidden behind the glare of the flashing lights. "We ran his record. He doesn't have a history of violence, no criminal charges. Just a clean, quiet life. But something about this doesn't sit right." Miss Karen swallowed hard. "Did he say anything to you?" The officer hesitated. "He's not talking. He lawyered up the moment we brought him in. But he lowered his voice. Something's off. He was way too calm for a man who just got caught kidnapping his own daughter." Miss Karen's fingers curled tighter around the blanket. "What happens now?" "He'll be booked, processed. He'll go through the court system. Given the circumstances, he'll probably face serious charges. But custody battles," the officer shook his head. "They get messy." Miss Karen knew that all too well. She had worked with too many children caught in the middle of situations like this, situations where the legal system didn't always work as it should. She glanced down at Lily, who had curled up against her, her tiny fingers gripping the fabric of Miss Karen's sleeve. This wasn't just a case. It wasn't just paperwork. This was Lily's life. A few hours later, at the hospital, doctors confirmed that Lily was unharmed, shaken, exhausted, but physically okay. Child Protective Services arrived not long after, asking questions, reviewing reports. The daycare owner, Miss Karen's boss, showed up too, relief all over her face. Miss Karen barely processed most of it. She answered what she could, stayed by Lily's side as much as they allowed her to. But her mind was still running through everything. Why had he done this? What had he meant by those last words? She finally left the hospital just before dawn. The sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of morning casting a soft glow over the empty parking lot. She sat in her car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe. It was over, but it didn't feel like it. A week passed. The daycare reopened. Parents were extra cautious, double-checking IDs, lingering a little longer at pickup times. Miss Karen kept a close eye on everything, but a heaviness still lingered in her chest. Lily's mother came in one afternoon, holding her daughter's hand a little too tightly. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept properly in days. "Miss Karen," she said softly, "can we talk?" Miss Karen led her to a quiet corner, watching as the woman struggled to find the right words. "I don't know how to thank you," she finally said. "If you hadn't followed them that night." Her voice broke, and she squeezed Lily's hand. "I don't even want to think about it." Miss Karen shook her head. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone would do." The woman gave her a sad smile. "Not everyone would have trusted their gut the way you did." She exhaled slowly. "I thought I knew him. I thought he was just a father who wanted more time with his daughter. But after what he did," she swallowed hard. "Now I don't know what he's capable of." Miss Karen hesitated. "Have they said anything more about his case?" The woman bit her lip. "His lawyer is arguing that he had a lapse in judgment, that he wasn't trying to hurt her, that he just panicked." She looked away. "But I don't believe that. I saw the way he looked at me in court. It was like he knew something I didn't." A cold knot twisted in Miss Karen's stomach. Lily's father was in custody, waiting for trial. But even behind bars, he still had control. He had planted something, a seed of doubt, of fear. And they all felt it. Miss Karen knelt beside Lily, brushing a hand over her soft curls. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Lily nodded sleepily. "I like it here. You keep me safe." Miss Karen forced a smile, but deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't over. Maybe the legal system would work the way it should. Maybe he would be locked away for a long time. Or maybe, one day, she would turn around and see him again. And if that day ever came, Miss Karen promised herself one thing. She wouldn't ignore her gut feeling ever again.